In this section, we're going to talk about directives, specifically custom directives. We have already seen the most common built-in directives that Angular offers, but we're going to write our own. And specifically, we're going to do something about our event list, and also it's time to do a few changes in our own page, which is still empty. So in our own page, we'll have a few boxes that will display the list of events based on some criteria. But before doing that, let's take a look at how to create a very simple directive. The first thing I'm going to do is to add a new root to our app.js. So we'll have the root for the home page itself. So that will be /, and that will be view home HTML. Next step, I'm going to create the new home template. At the minute it will just be the hello word, nothing special, and I'm going to save it as home HTML under my views. Okay, so if I save and I double check, I have the hello being displayed. We can get rid of the controller at the minute, we can always define it later, and we'll just have the view right now. Okay, now I want to create a new file where to store my directive. So I'm gonna save it and I call it directive.js. And I'm going to include the same file in the footer, so I'll just copy that inside my index.html, and that will be directive.js, okay? Now, inside the directive.js file, we can invoke our usual module, and if you remember, that will be event app. And now we're going to define our directive. Guess what's the keyword to create a directive? Well, it's .directive. .directive, which takes as an input the directive name. So we're going to call it hello trainee. Okay? And then it takes a function. Inside our function, we're just going to do a return. The first thing we have to define is the restrict property. Restrict is what used to define the type of our directive. So it can either be an element directive, an attribute directive, or a class directive, or a comment directive which gets indicated with M. Or it can be all of them. So if we type EAC, we can use it both as an element, or as an attribute, or as a class. So if it's an element directive, it will be script, for example. It's a document object model element. If it's an attribute directive, the corresponding one will be SRC in a typical DOM. If it's a class directive, well, you know already. So in our case, that will be an element directive. Or maybe, yeah, let's define it in both ways. And then we'll just return a simple template that is just a bold text with hello trainee, welcome to the event app. Okay? What we have to do now is to use this directive inside our code, so in the home HTML template, and when you define a directive with this syntax, the way you need to invoke it in your HTML is by typing hello-trainee. So it's all lowercase, and as you can see from the directive, instead is written in lower camel case. So back to our home HTML, I'll just save it and double check in the app. As you can see, we have the text hello trainee, welcome to the event app. That's because we are using our directive that we have defined just here. And if I copy this tag and I keep adding that, I'll see the same text multiple times. Okay? There are no parameters, but it's working fine. And you can write the same directive also as a div with an attribute which is hello-trainee. And that will work anyways. Let's check. So this is the first one, and this is the second one, right? Div hello trainee that contains our bold, and the element itself that contains our bold text. And the last thing you can do is also a div with a class, or any other element, with a class of hello trainee. And bam, we have it. So these are the three ways, the most used one in which you can use a directive. You can also type it as a comment. And if you really need to use one comment directive, you can type it like this. So you'll have your comment with directive : and the name of your directive. If I save it, nothing will happen as long as I don't add the M property inside my restrict. Okay? Good. Now, to complete this simple introduction, I'm going to show you one more thing. Let's take a look at our template. And if we take the first element, we'll see that we have an hello trainee element that contains our template, our directive template. And the same happens for all the other elements. Even if we use it as an attribute directive, we'll see that it's contained within the div. But we can also replace the content of our DOM. So replace the content of these tags, these DOM elements, with what's being returned in our directive. And the simplest way to do that is going to be to use the replace keyword and set it to true. Okay? So if I save that, this time I'll see also my comment directive because I'm replacing a comment with a proper DOM element. But now my UI is all messed up because, as you can see, we have just a set of bold text. We have the first one, we have the second one with the attribute type, we had the third one with the class directive, and the fourth one which was a comment, but it was replaced by our template. If you want to stay compatible with HTML5 and prevent some browser weird behaviors, I suggest that you put a data dash in front of your directive. I tend to use the attribute directive quite often, more than the element one, but it's up to you really. And to double check that what I'm saying is true, well, let's just see. Boom, it's still working fine. Because Angular will strip the data dash before our directive name and decode it as a directive without any issue. Now that you had a grasp of how a directive can be created, it's time to move into something more specific. And we're going to use the link function as well to build up our own directives. So let's move into the next lesson.